This series of interviews with distinguished Scottish women artists called Scottish Women Can Paint came about as a riposte to the statement made by the German painter Jörg Baselitz when he said, "Women can't paint," when asked why they were so underrepresented in art museums and major exhibitions. These interviews with several prominent Scottish women artists sets out to disprove that belief and to understand how, against incredible odds, a group of dedicated women painters have managed to create some of the best paintings produced in Scotland and abroad during the last half of the 20th century. Today, I'm talking to Lys Hansen, widely considered to be Scotland's leading figurative expressionist painter. Lys, it's a delight to see you again. We've known each other for a very long time. Before I start on the kind of body of questions, I would just like to ask you, if you heard Baselitz say, "Women can't paint," within earshot of you, what would be your reply to him?
I'd probably just laugh and think he was ridiculous, Yeah.
So let's go on just the basics. Where and when were you born?
1936. I'm born in Falkirk.
Which was just before the war. Were you evacuated during the war?
No, but my family were involved in sometimes taking in Jewish evacuees in Alloa. Yes, people that were brought from Clydeside. And we had a Jewish family with us for a while, yes.
Mm-hmm. And Alloa is in Fife, yes?
No, Clackmannanshire.
Oh, Clackmannanshire.
The smallest county in Scotland, yes.
But
still, it's on the side of the Forth, and they did a lot of making of war engineering there, in actual fact. Plus, it had Harlem's big company, engineering company there, so yes.
But your family further back aren't all Scottish, are they?
No. My grandfather was Danish, from an island in the Baltic Sea, small and beautiful, or as they say, small and beautifully formed. And that's been a big link for me to Europe and to Scandinavia. Yeah.
So almost sort of a double culture, Scottish culture and Scandinavian culture.
Yes.
Was there any interest in art in your immediate family background?
Well, not visual art, but in actual fact, my mother's family, who came from Ayrshire, and they're called Burns, they had a shoemaking business, so they were shoemakers. They were also musicians. They could sort of play anything, these wonderful people. And my grandfather in Grangemouth, he moved there, but he started a boys' pipe band, so he taught the pipes. And that pipe band eventually became Muirhead's pipe band, that of course is very much award-winning.
And was there a kind of, with the singing and music, was there a kind of folk music background as well?
No, I think so. I was exposed to a lot of classical music. There were singers in the family, and there was also a very, very fine dancer who moved to America and was part of a dancing academy in Central America. So I was always, along with my cousins, encouraged to do my party piece and perform at family parties. So I danced as Carmen Miranda with fruit on my head, yes. And my cousin as Dorothy Lamour, Hawaiian style, in a grass skirt.
I'd like to have seen that.
Yes, so it was filled with music. They played the piano, of course, the family. And my father sang very well. And so did my mother. So they sang duets. So it was very rich that way, very rich in creativity.
Was there someone then outside the family at school or a friend who encouraged you in art? Because
not really. I didn't have an art teacher until I was 15. And if you remember, during the war, you couldn't really buy any sort of drawing materials for children or anything like that. So, people were fighting for their lives, my parents were bakers. My father was a gunner on the convoys going to Russia and Murmansk. And so you know, and my mother carried on this small home bakery. And
so then...
well, I wanted to say something about this because this is important. When you have a family who are working very basically, therefore you're given these very strong values. And if you have to start your work every day with flour, fat, water, these are the salt, these are the very elements. And I think that's a very, very good in today's society of super affluence and waste and distraction. You know, we had so little and we had to make so much of it. So the foundation they gave me in applying myself to my work or to my life was very, very, very strong and very basic.
As a girl then, did you help out in the bakery?
No. I think the odd times I would go in and out. I did eventually, as a late teenager, learn to drive one of the vans. That taught me to drive. And I did actually have an accident once late at night near a pit. I was taking a friend home and there had been a lot of rain in November and the water got into the wheels and I got tumbled off the seat. There were no belts in those days. And so there was a few cookies, sort of jam cookies floating about. And well, it's all good experience, but I did get a crowd of miners who had just come off their 11 o'clock shift to help me put the van up right and get it out of a field I had gone into. So, yes.
So you were a tough cookie from the beginning?
Well, you just, you know, my father always said to me, you know, you have to rely on your own decisions. You know, he thought very much as a soldier, you know.
So then when did you decide you wanted to become an artist?
Well, I got shipped off to school at Scone Palace when I was 11 because my parents wanted to concentrate on the sort of post-war building of, and their young life too. And it just so happened an art teacher arrived from the Slade along with the Latin teacher. And her birthday was the same day as mine. But she was inspiring because she was over 6 foot tall. She had, as they call it, nut brown hair and pleated sort of telephones around the ears, flat as a pancake, with big feet, but this exquisite face and mouth, so she looked like a Murillo painting, you know. She was just fascinating to me. More interesting than the little fat history teacher and the Aberdonian French teacher, you know. So that was interesting. And when she ate her food, she had the plate and she laid the salt, the pepper, the mustard out like a palette, you know. But I have to tell you, when I had a huge exhibition at the Third Eye in Glasgow, I had managed to get her address. And I sent her a card of the image of the divided self. And she wrote back and said, "You have inspired me to paint." So what about that?
So it went the other way around. So then, did she encourage you to go to art college?
Yes, she did. Of course she did. Yes, of course she did. But I was also keen to go to drama college, you know, and perform. So...
You know, Marina Abramovich once said, you can't become an artist. You're either born one or not. So do you agree with that?
I believe that certain people are born with creativity in them, which is very powerful. And if it's powerful enough, it has to find a need or an avenue to channel its force into. And I think when we are young, all of us, we have no idea of our potential. And so we make certain decisions and we take certain paths. And if you try to be true to yourself, you know, something emerges. And for me, it came slowly. I think that's good. I always thought at art school that Everybody else was, lots of people were much better than I was, whatever better is, I don't know. But there's few of them left standing. You know, I'm still here.
Yes.
Just.
So you did go to art school. Where and when?
Edinburgh, mid-50s, and I completed the course there in drawing and painting under Sir Robin Phillipson, William Gillis, Johnny Maxwell.
Some of the greats.
Yes, indeed, the greats of Scottish painting, of course.
Yeah. What was your experience of art school, and how were you perceived? Were you treated differently as a woman from your male contemporaries?
Well, when the photographers came into the college looking for an art student to photograph in front of something, they sent for me. So Phillipson used to send them for me. And no, I don't think so. I do think that the only time I really found a difference was when I got a Rome scholarship, the Abbey Minor. And two of my fellow students were talking in the corridor and said, fancy giving it to a woman, you know. And I thought, a woman? I sort of was at the stage I hadn't thought of myself as a woman. I was a girl, you know, a growing girl. So that was a bit sort of, you know, I think I was just unaware there was this difference.
Were there any influential female tutors at the college? You mentioned 3 male ones.
No, no, not at all. Not at all. There was a very nice but a very shy lady called Anne Newlands who taught antique drawing in a twilight class, and she was just very
so very
tentative.
Very male orientated, the whole lot.
Absolutely.
Even when I went 15 years later.
Yes, of course. But quite a lot of the men, and I think Gillis is part of that, and Johnny Maxwell, you know, they work with their feminine side, you know, and their work is very domestic. I find it so anyway.
Well, I mean, in fact, in that sense, both of them were probably gay. And I think there is, well, a question I was going to ask, you know, do you think there is a female aesthetic sensibility?
I think there's a female, I work from my experience of being female and being a woman, and I think a man works from his perspective. That's how he sees the world, you know, and how he's trained to see the world and his position in it. And women are often confined, or have previously been confined within this female role. And one of the things I was really keen about was, you know, breaking this mold and redefining what this body, which has a function of producing children, you know. And I wanted to get deep into the psyche. So, I mean, you will see in my book, Passionate Paint, that there's a big split torso. And this stems from my study, actually, at Edinburgh University doing fine art, because I went on to do a course with Talbot Rice. And from this sort of classical image of the Venus without arms, often without legs, you had this most wonderful basic shape. You know, the pelvis is a tremendous cradle. I don't like to think of it, it is a vessel, I suppose, but I think a cradle is better because it's not just about containing something, but it's about nurturing, holding, you know, and I think this is a fantastic shape to be, you know, absolutely.
I mean, a lot of your work is about the female body. I mean, and if painting is about gesture, what is it about different bodies that produces different gestures? Does the female body, by its very nature then, as you're saying, the cradle shape, produce different gestures?
Oh, well, I think there is a huge force within us as humans, And if you remember, an amazing exhibition came to Edinburgh in the 50s. Were you born in the 50s, Andrew?
1954.
Oh,
so I might
right.
have been
Yes,
too
no,
young.
you wouldn't see it, Andrew. You're far too young. Called The Family of Man. You know. So we're all shapes, all colors, you know, and continuing on a divided line when we should actually be working together and admiring each other, supporting each other. And so it's disappointing at times when people have a prejudice against color, against race, against genders or gay people or whatever, you know. My father had a wonderful saying, we're all Jock Tamson's bairns. You're right, yeah. We're all in this together. We're just specks of dust, you know, floating about.
And your paintings very much are about that diversity and the dichotomy between male and female and somehow trying to integrate it, I would say.
Yes, I suppose so. I mean, there's a painting behind you called Woman with Man, where in actual fact he sits within her, you know. And I also think the relationship between particularly male artists and their mother always has a very, very powerful force. Invariably because perhaps the father of the artist hasn't considered that artwork is too masculine, you know. But, well, it's very interesting.
I was going to ask you about what recognition you received at art school, and of course you got that postgraduate.
Yeah, and scholarships, and I also had the support of Philipson and Gillis, you know, letters of recommendation to go on to do fine art because I sort of made up my own degree course at that time.
Because that's an interesting thing, because I did that mixture of art and art history at Edinburgh. And it also, when your things about divided, it makes you into a little bit of a schizophrenic person because you are a trained artist and a trained art historian. Did you find that dichotomy?
Well, I think, sorry.
Did you find that dichotomy difficult?
No, I didn't. But I think when we were at art school doing the, you know, standing on the studio floor, you know, all these hours every day, which was a new experience from sitting in a classroom, I thought that those who did, we thought, you know, our prejudices, we thought that they were slightly lesser being at university at the same time. They were just reading about it, whereas we were out
the
there
coalface
doing it, you know. Yes, yes.
But I always prefer an intelligent artist, to be quite honest.
Well, it's the combination. I mean, I think it's like driving. You start really learning when you're on your own. So, you know, then you search out. I think yourself is your best teacher. You need certain information for your needs, whatever they may be, in order to satisfy something inside. And so you seek the information you need. So, I mean, I did a lot of traveling, and I would like to talk a little bit about my teaching.
Yes, no, I want to talk about all those things, but before we get on to that, can I ask you about how you forged a career after leaving art school? You know, what did you do when you left art school? Did you go into teacher training immediately, or did you try and survive as an artist?
All right, my mother was going to America to see a sister. And she asked if I would go home and look after my father. And while I was there doing that, I got myself an itinerant teacher of primary art in 10 schools a week and went around all the little schools in this little county teaching these wonderful little children. Yes. And then I got married after that and we went to London. And I became pregnant, and we didn't like London, so we didn't like London and being so poor in a bedsit. So we came back, and my husband, George Sutherland, he went to university to complete his teaching degree. He already had his degree in classics and in English, of course. And I went to Murray House.
The teacher training college.
Teacher training, to which I received a distinguishing certificate. And I also had a baby at that time too.
Well, I wondered how anyone can manage to balance these things. You're a mother with a baby, you're a new wife, and you've got a teaching job. How on earth did you manage to, or did you manage to paint during those early years?
Well, not quite so much. The brush is never far away from my hand. I did continue in a small way. Yes, it's difficult not to be with your paints.
Because I see you as such a prolific painter and a painter of very large, powerful canvases. Did you, as so many people did when they started, did you simply paint on your kitchen table? When did you get your first studio?
Oh, right. Let's see. Right. Well, my father, who was most encouraging, as I mentioned before, he was a baker and he had vans, and he also had a lot of contacts in and around the countryside. And one day he saw a rather large wooden building which had been collapsed, and he went and asked the farmer, how much do you want for that? Or what? So he bought this large wooden building for me. He bought it, and it was put in the garden. You know, this is when I was a student, really. So that was the first. Oh,
so you did have a studio from early on. You had your own space, which many women artists didn't.
Yes, I'm not sure I did much work in it, but the building was there. So although he wasn't sure about this art business, he said all the great paintings had been done. Yes, and you'll just get married anyway. You know, typical. I mean, we're a long way from the new man being born, you know.
Going back to the family thing, Maggie Hambling said that if she had a painting crying in one room,
a baby
crying in the other, she would go to the baby. I'm not sure if I entirely believe her, but what would you do?
I would do the same. Yes. I would go to the baby and tuck it under my hip, over my hip, and carry on. Yes.
So how did you manage to balance your artistic practice with family considerations? And did this affect your career, would you say?
I think it made me very, very focused, because there's only many hours in the day, and you have the family, they were my responsibility, so it's about just organizing time. And I suppose having lots of energy and being young and full of life, which is fantastic, was fantastic. So I organized a lot of shopping and cooking at the weekend, and did lots of good food, because I had 2 boys and my husband, so that's a family of 3 men and myself, yes. And as you know, the men are wonderful to look after, and they like to eat lots, so yes.
So you were superwoman.
Yes, of course. Yes, you know.
How necessary is discipline in an artistic career? And what quality do you think is most needed to be a successful artist?
Yeah, discipline is very good. That I learned at boarding school. Discipline not to cry when you're hurt. Discipline of keeping yourself in line. Discipline's terribly important. And not being a baby, you know. Not being
roll with
spoiled.
the punches.
Yes, that's right. And my father taught me to fight, you know, stick up for myself. So that's terribly important. The other thing I think an artist needs, or a person, is courage, huge courage. Courage to confront your limitations, you know, like anyone who wants to specialize, whether it's in sports or dance or music, the discipline and the focus and the courage is paramount. If you're a scaredy, leave it alone.
What was your first exhibition post-art college?
Right, it was very shortly afterwards. I think I'd been on scholarship to France and Germany at the time, and I had an exhibition, mostly works on paper, and they're here. I just recently got a few framed up. I had it at the Commonwealth Institute in Rutland Square.
I remember it well.
Do you? Yes. It's a very nice space. I'm not sure how it came about. I think I just walked in and asked.
And what age would you have been then? Out of art college?
Well, 2021, something.
So young,
like
so
that.
you were exhibiting from an early age.
Yes.
How was your work received then, critically, and now? Do you think there's been a difference?
Oh, yes. Well, I don't know if I was even noticed then. I mean, you were just, no, I think, well, often. I don't know if you remember Felix McCulloch. He wrote for the Edinburgh Evening News.
Yeah.
Yes, he picked up on things. But my husband, George Sutherland, he helped to organise in Edinburgh, when we were in Edinburgh for, finishing our studies, a sacred art exhibition. And this was done in conjunction with the Grail. Don't know if you remember the Grail. Yes, the coffee house, which was very innovative at the time with a lovely Australian lady. And I think we had a big selection of big names. Well, George contacted them, and the mighty Anne Redpath came along to that. Well, she was quite huffed because she wasn't asked in the first place, because she said she had done a lot of paintings of churches, but she was very nice, really. So, yes, and I think we had work by Epstein and a whole collection of interesting work, and I had this baby and all the rest of it. I mean, behind me, I just briefly want to say, because it speaks for itself, the red figure is the young woman with the baby. That's myself and Giles, terrified. And the rather monstrous older woman, see the ferocity of motherhood there. Can you see her?
Yes, I can see her.
Yes, carrying whatever on her back, a grown child. So, and there's two over there from doing sort of quite, I think, vigorous work. There's two much gentler pieces, because that's a challenge for me to,
When with Sheila Mullen, when I asked her that question about did having children, domestic things affect her art, she said, children are part of my creativity.
Of course.
What makes it?
Of course. I think actually, you never forget this growth inside you, and the actual inner power of this child to work within you, its physical movement, and you're so aware of it. And also, I think you learn a great depth of sensitivity, compassion, warmth and caring, and yes, that comes in other ways, but the child is just fantastic, it's just really fantastic.
But I also remember in some of the paintings you showed with me when I showed you in the 1980s, that you showed paintings that were very split male and female, and I saw those as being about split identities, but in fact maybe now is that more about the split between mother and child, those pictures?
Could be part of that. One thing that was really interesting is when you feel something very, very strongly, like you don't quite know whether to be the mother or the artist or whatever, and there is this division within you, because you're being torn in several directions, that this has a universal significance. This feeling belongs to so many others. So from the very personal, it becomes political as well. At the time I was working and showing with you and at the City Arts Centre, there was all the troubles in Ireland going on, where this lovely country, you know, was being divided and torn and families killed and everything. And I mean, although I did these projects in Berlin, and it's a very important part of my, particularly my drawing work, you know, you don't have to go there to see war, or the damage it has done, or the destruction of buildings and homes and peoples and lives. You know, I mean, war is constant.
You preempted one of my most important questions, was how did your work engage with political events in the latter half of the 20th century?
Absolutely.
It's really the basis of it, I would say.
Yes, very much so, because our youth and growing up in early marriage was, of course, all to do with the Cold War, you know, and of course the wall didn't come down in Berlin until 1998, you know, so...
89.
89, I beg your pardon. Yes, 89. So,
and you were there in Berlin in the 80s, weren't you? Because I was in Berlin.
Yes, I was there. I got a wonderful scholarship from Scottish Arts Council, and I used it also to take a big exhibition to Ireland and to show in Ireland, in Belfast at the university there, and also in Dublin at the Project Art Centre. And I got that exhibition by just walking in and knocking on the door. And they said, well, send your slides, and I did, and, you know, and they took this enormous exhibition, and, you know, they took the work over there, they made a catalogue, and Hayden Murphy, the writer, who lives in Edinburgh, or did, you know, he wrote a wonderful essay on the work, you know, so these were wonderful opportunities.
But there's something else I wanted to ask you, which is to do with the Scottish art scene. And also, did you feel that you were part of the Scottish art scene, or, I know you became president of the Society of Scottish Artists, but in the beginning, or did you feel you needed to get out of Scotland to broaden your ideas and be involved with things outside Scotland?
Well, I don't think I wanted to leave Scotland and get out. No. Scotland, you know, has this magnificence, and it has a raw, brutal quality about it. I need these things. They're part of my psyche. They're part of who I am. The village where I live, you know, the Ochils, they rise above me behind my house, huge and mountainous. And these are the big forms, although I don't paint landscape directly. They're part of the sort of building of my figures, and the, you know, the huge influence just in forming shape.
Almost like Burns, Herd is like a distant hill.
That's right, yes. So, no, but what was important, what Berlin did for me, was it took me away entirely from the family, so that it removed that strong identity. And I could just be me, and trying to find who and what you are. That original inner core is something an artist really has to seek, because of all the influences of teachers and training and other artists. And so the solitary, you know, being able to work by yourself every day, all day, and just be quiet and be very deep inside yourself was a fantastic experience.
And also, to continue the idea of going abroad, you have Danish background, so, and you try to explore that as well, didn't you?
Well, absolutely, because I have a great love of very clear colours, as you would probably notice, and also had a really lovely experience as a student, because in Stirling in the 50s, there was this wonderful shop, well, it was an experience more than a shop, called Form and Colour, and it had been set up by a very nice couple who had trained at Glasgow School of Art. And there you could find the latest Danish designs in cookware, in wooden forms, and They took a house as well and furnished it. So you suddenly think, yeah, this feels right for me, you know, this certain element. So, and the fact was that my grandfather, Danish grandfather, who always spoke with a very strong accent, was really lovely. He was a great big gentleman, you know, very large, and he had this rolling walk and of course a strong accent, which strangely enough was more Swedish because Bornholm was part of Sweden for a while. He was lovely, and the granny from Aberdeen wasn't quite so lovely, but then she had had a hard life. So he settled in Grangemouth and brought the family up there. But yes, so I'm keen on roots. I'm keen on getting inside things, and that was part of my investigation.
And getting things from inside you out as well.
Yes, well, they eventually choke you if you don't get them out.
The other final question I was going to ask, you had said to me about teaching, you wanted to speak about teaching. How important was that to you?
Very, because in teaching you have to also first teach yourself. I taught very little children, and I taught in also a very rough school in Alwa, from very impoverished and rough families. And I think these children, they teach you to teach, because if you haven't got something valuable to say to them, they can see right through you. So, you know, these are very important grounding lessons. But moving on to teaching at art school, further education colleges, summer schools, all of that. So I've had the full range. And I think there's something very exciting about sparking, just igniting something within young people.
If you had to give advice to a young female art student now, what would you say to her?
Well, I would say she's goddamn lucky now. She's got the pill. She doesn't have to get married. No, what I mean is I think there's a better balance and there's an acceptance in society. I mean, when I had Giles, I mean, there were other young women in the ward at Stirling, so that if they weren't married, you know, the nurses were quite cruel to them, you know. So that's all changed, I'm happy to say. So what would I say to them? Well, I think you've got it made. I also said to June Redfern, you've got a wife, you've got it made. So what would I say? Well, you know, having the pill and having this freedom to have relationships is not without its pitfalls, I imagine. At the same time, you know, the corsets are off, you know, I think. Do you think so?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So
but still, you know, Hilary Robbins said to me, you know, 2/3 of art students come out of college now are women, yet only 1/4 of exhibiting artists are women. So they've still got a way to go.
Yeah.
I mean, it's better than it was in your time, but I mean, I think, do you still think women have to fight for their equality still?
Yes. I think they have to just, you know, confront the situation. I mean, there's a lot of women in politics now, that's very important. There's a lot of women in arts administration, so they mustn't just get seduced by the nice young male artists coming in. You know, there's all these things going on. So it's important that they're there at the table making decisions and making policies. And of course, the women have to come up with the work, you know. One thing I would say about Scotland is maybe not, I don't know, maybe you have a better overview of this. She does have a problem with the body. So perhaps I took an area that was probably very difficult, because the work challenges challenges people when they look at it.
But I think that's what makes you so important. You took that difficult area and you made it your own.
Well, I'll tell you this, when I left art school, I knew what I didn't want to paint, and I didn't want to paint still life and landscape. I mean, that's a good start.
Would everything have been difficult if you'd been born a man? Different?
Well, men have their problems too. They have their strife, you know. They know that they have to support a family, get a job. They've got to, you know, keep in with the lads and all that. You see, I think I had a very special route because I wasn't bowing to anybody. You know, I was just sort of weaving my way through best I knew how. And I think there was a certain freedom in that. And if the work wasn't good enough, I think it was my own limitations. And the other thing is, you have to truly believe that what you're doing is pretty okay, you know.
But I would also say that I think in all the artists we've talked about, Margaret Hunter in Berlin, who you knew, and June Redfern, Lil Nielsen, these artists, for me, have produced something more interesting in the work their male compatriots produce,
What do you
yourself.
think it is, Andrew?
Well, we talked about a female sensibility. I think it's not that. I think it's overcoming the difficulties and not having it so easy, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so. That's part of it. I mean, and that's terribly important. You know, you see my studio, it's very nice. And people walk in and say, oh, this is nice. Well, it took 30 years of hard work at teaching, running the family, saving, keeping the support of my husband, rearing 2 sons who are very talented in the intellect and in skills with hands. So you see, I reaped the reward of that dedication
and
to
producing
them.
an oeuvre of huge paintings and wooden sculptures as well now.
Yes,
I mean,
but this studio, it's warmly heated. It's got a toilet and a bath, and this has meant I could exchange with artists abroad who have better provision from their government than ours does. So I exchanged with artists from Berlin and also from Denmark. And so this made me quite proud. After you wouldn't ask them if you... Well, I was in broken down mills where there was a lot of mildew and rot, you know, so you couldn't get up the stairs hardly, you know. So, you know, I worked in some rubbish places. And I said, well, and I also damaged my health, you know, as well. So it was important that I find somewhere and build something. Then no one can take it away from you. Well, except the bank or whatever, you know. But yes, I think it's good to struggle, you know.
And to struggle and succeed. And in your case, I think you have succeeded in every way. My final question is, how do you define success as an artist?
I think when I look at a painting or a drawing, even a simple drawing, and it fulfills what I wanted from it. And this can just be a very few lines, or it can be a very large piece that's sitting in the studio, you know. That to me, that it satisfies me. And that's really the only important thing. It's wonderful to have exhibitions and put your work out in the public and to have a good response. Of course it is. And you need to share it, because these are ideas and experience. But, well, you know, getting to be a dame or a lady something or other, or a sir something is, you know, that's very nice. But, or an RSA or whatever you want to go. That's really, it's not, I don't call that success. a very nice acknowledgement.
Personal satisfaction is what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, you should be very satisfied with yourself.
Oh, God, no.
Listen, thank you, Lys. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. It's been very nice with you.